before we get into this text, I thought I'd share a short little quip about marriage. Son was talking to his father, and he said, "Dad, I've heard in some parts of the world, a man doesn't even know his wife until he marries her." And the father said, "Son, that's true everywhere." You might be thinking by my sermon title that I'm referring to Bathsheba when I said, "Here comes trouble." You know, Bathsheba, the classic tempter as she's portrayed in the movies. I think there was one with Gregory Peck and Susan Hayward. I probably saw it once, but I'll have to watch it again. You know, the tempter, the one David couldn't resist. No, my sermon title doesn't actually refer to that. Instead, I'm hearing in my head that childish taunt, "Nah, nah, 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 nah. Somebody's going to be in trouble," because David's status as God's golden child is about to come crashing down. Now, the story that we heard here today, and I invite you to actually look at it in your Bibles, 2 Samuel chapter 11. It's a story that can be read on many levels, because it can be about how great men who are called by God are still humans, and they struggle with their sin. It also is a story about how people in power, though not all people, can begin to feel above the law and moral that guide a society. There's a bit of subtext about now not only racial differences, but how stories of women can get swept under the rug and often aren't believed. So we start out. King David is at home, but his army is off fighting other nations for Israel. David wanders out onto the roof. Maybe he's got to clear his head of worry about what's happening on the front lines. Maybe he's going to stretch his legs. Maybe to survey his kingdom from his new palace. Or maybe he knew his neighbor's wife liked to bathe in the afternoon and wanted to see her. We don't know. But no matter what the reason, there she is. He's curious, he's interested, and he's alone. David steps back inside and confers with his manservant. He wants to find out who she is. That's Bathsheba, daughter of Eliab, and she's the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Wife of Uriah, huh? I know where he is. He's not here. Knowing that her husband was thick in the battle for Jerusalem, David sends for her. Now here is where the Bible is absolutely silent about Bathsheba. We can surmise at least one thing. She knows who the king is, but what goes through her head when some messengers arrive from the palace and ask her to come visit with the king? Was she flattered that the king would even notice her and ask to see her, even though her husband's away? Or did she worry that the king might tell her Uriah was dead? Maybe she was going to get some bad news. We can only imagine the sort of mixed emotions she felt as she went to the palace. She knew she couldn't really refuse the king. And again, we don't know exactly what happened when Bathsheba meets David face to face. We only know the outcome of that fateful meeting, that Bathsheba gets pregnant. Oops. Now, before I talk about David's reaction, I want to lift up some interpretations that have been made about Bathsheba, especially by women commentators, which I was very surprised to find out. Some have said that no matter what happened, in this instance, though we don't hear it from the text, that Bathsheba was raped. Some have said that she has willingly committed adultery. But I have a hard time believing that one because ultimately Bathsheba didn't have a choice. When the king, or someone with great power and influence, calls, you answer. David goes to some lengths after he finds out she's pregnant to concoct a way of covering his tracks. He arranges for Uriah to return to Jerusalem to the heat of the fighting. But before he does that, he tries to send Uriah home to go stay with his wife. But he doesn't. He won't do that while everyone, that's a typical thing. When you're fighting in battle, you stay with your troops. You don't go home to your wife while no one else is. David's still trying to cover his tracks. So here Uriah's loyalty to his colleagues and ironically, the king he serves, contribute to David's undoing. And Uriah's loyalty stands in stark contrast to the deceit of his king. What we don't really think about is that Uriah is a Hittite. He's a foreigner, something David knows. And the Hittites were a race from the north of Israel. They were skilled in military technologies and communications, but they were subject themselves to social fragmentation. So, does that mean that Uriah is expendable? Or that his property doesn't need to be respected as it would be for a Hebrew? So if we scratch beneath the surface here, even slightly, it reveals a tangle. There's attraction and sex. There's deceit and control. There's ethnicity and theft. To David, Uriah has to be expendable. And this proves true when Uriah is eventually sent to those front lines and never returns. Knowing all this about David, it's tempting to judge him. But how do we know that you or I wouldn't take advantage of a privileged position either? It's hard to know until we've been there. It's also hard to ignore the story of abusive relationships, which ultimately is the subtext here. And those relationships have been around since the first human beings fought over a mastodon steak. So translated from our text directly to the media of today, the story sounds familiar, and it sounds contemporary. You can just fill in the blank. Someone is caught in scandal, and that someone finds a convenient way out. The thing is, no matter how we or David try to cover up transgressions, there is one who always knows what's in our hearts and what's in our minds. There's a lot more to the rest of this story. I invite you to read it more thoroughly, and it begins with Nathan's timely visit, telling David that God is not amused. Ultimately, the message is that we shouldn't hope that God is on our side if we make poor choices. We should always instead align our choices to be on God's side for mercy, for justice, and always